Hi everyone, Mike Mal here. So, is the world getting better or worse? I'll cut right to the chase on this one. The world is getting better, believe it or not. Don't believe me? Well, stick around and I'll literally prove it to you. When having the debate on the fate of humanity, most of my friends, especially my religious friends, argue that the world is in fact getting much worse. And it's not that hard to understand why they would think that. I mean, a few minutes of the nightly news and we hear about wars and violent crimes, pandemics, global poverty, friends turning on friends, racism, corruption, the list goes on and on and on. So how then can I make the crack-brained argument that the world is actually getting better? Well, it's about the evidence. See, for the longest time, I used to feel the same way. I thought this planet is going to hell in a handbasket and a black ribbon, and there's no hope for any of us. Well, almost no hope. But one day I thought I would do the research. What does the evidence actually tell us? And after countless hours of researching, reading statistics, articles, and so on, I was shocked, flabbergasted. In fact, I was pleasantly surprised with the results. That's because every metric of human progress shows a burgeoning of goodness and not bad. As for what we see in the media, well, let's remember that industries improve over time and the media is no exception. The media industry has become so sophisticated that there's literally more recording of events today all over the world than ever before. We can do things like watch a war directly from our living rooms in real time. And the media is no different than any other industry in the sense that it just wants to make money. And there's nothing wrong with that, but they have to sensationalize their reports so that you don't turn the channel. I mean, if all the evidence we have is what the media shows us, then yeah, I guess the world is in a whole heap of trouble. Thankfully, it's not. There's a lot of evidence, and I do mean a lot of evidence, detailing our progression. So what is this evidence? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I'll share it with you right now. Here are my 10 favorite metrics of human progression. Let's start with something big, war. War is a good one because it seems so few people know the reality of war statistics. For example, did you know there's less war today than almost ever? Sounds nuts, right? But it's true. The region known as Germany today once had over 300 countries in it, and they were virtually all at war with each other. And since the making of this video, if it wasn't for Vladimir Putin's invasion of the Ukraine, there aren't even any two countries at war. And the United States, usually accused of poking their military nose all over the world, has less and less troops stationed around the world than almost ever. And casualties of war? They're way down. As wars have become rarer, battle death rates have also decreased considerably in the last several decades. With international rules of war and new war technologies, we may be living in the most peaceful time in all of human history. It's true. Look it up for yourself and you'll see them right. Another big one is violent crime. Violent crime is defined as forcible rape, sexual assault, robbery, assault, and murder. I mean, what's the point of living in a war-free society if violent crime is rampant, right? But did you know that since the 1970s, violent crime has been on a sharp and steady decline? Yes, all over the world, in fact. And in the particular case of forcible rape, it's believed to be a lot smaller number than the statistics show, because a lot less women in the 70s felt powered to report a crime that usually brought a lot of shame. Let's look at poverty. Sometimes it feels like we're all living in poverty, doesn't it? But what about extreme poverty? According to the United Nations, extreme poverty today is defined by people that make $1.90 US per day or less. And that number does get adjusted for inflation. So what are the statistics? Before the 1900s, exact figures are hard to pinpoint because of limitations of historical data. However, estimates suggest that 80% of the global population lived in extreme poverty. In the 1970s, that number dropped by half to about 40%. In 1990, it went down a bit to 35%. But today, the percentage of people on Earth living in the category of extreme poverty is 9%. Just think about that. Only 100 years ago, the overwhelming majority of humans lived in extreme poverty, while today it's only 9%. And what's more, this percentage is still declining. What about disease? Well, it's true that there are many diseases today that weren't around before, we learned to take much better control of them than we ever have. While we have overcome such colossal malevolence like leprosy and the dreaded smallpox, diseases like measles went from millions of sufferers to a few 100,000. Or in the case of polio, well, in 2020, there were only 140 cases worldwide. We're conquering the fight with such fiercely evil afflictions such as diphtheria, pertussis, better known as whooping cough, and tetanus. And we're slowly winning the fight with the big one, cancer. There are numerous advances in cancer research and treatments like chemotherapy and radiation and targeted therapy. And they've led to significant improvement in cancer survival, while the 5-year survival rate has skyrocketed to unseen heights. And the development of what's known as antiretroviral therapy has revolutionized the treatment of HIV/AIDS. Once a brutal killer 30 years ago, I remember when I was a teen in the 80s, AIDS was a scare. It was a sure ticket to the morgue. Today it's been transformed from a positively fatal disease to nothing more than a manageable chronic condition. And while on the topic of the human body, let's discuss infant mortality and longevity of life. Consider this. Life expectancy in the year 1900 was 31. Let that sink in. But what about before 1900? What was life expectancy with human beings when averaged our entire 200,000 to 300,000 years of existence as Homo sapiens? This is a speculative estimate because we can never know for sure. Likely the average lifespan was very, very short. Some historical estimates suggest that life expectancy may have been as low as 20. 20 years old. That means at 10, you would have been middle-aged. And of course, one of the main effects of these statistics is infant mortality. So how are we doing in that area? Well, in the United States, infant mortality rates went from 165 deaths per 1,000 to about 5.4 deaths per 1,000. And while significant disparities do still exist in mortality rates between developed and developing countries, the steady decline of deaths in live births is demonstrated worldwide. The fact is, we're living longer than we ever have, and the lives that we are living are far more vibrant. Here's a good one. Racism. Surely there's more racism now than before. Actually, no, there's less, believe it or not. This is actually quite obvious when you think about it. I mean, you don't have to go back in time too far to see it. Consider what race relations were like in the U.S. 200 years ago, when it was illegal for whites to marry non-whites. They even had a criminal charge if they caught two people of opposite races having sex. Incidentally, that crime is called amalgamation. What if I could travel back in time and I walked into a saloon somewhere in Montana 200 years ago? I walk in and I befriend the locals and we engage in some banter and chat. What do you think would happen if sometime within the discussion I tell them, I envision a day will come when they'll put a black man, well, let's be more like the times, they'll put a Negro in the White House as President of the United States. I think my lynching will be the most likely outcome, and I'm not being hyperbolic. They would probably lynch me. But today, they did put a black man in the White House twice, even if you took out the black vote. And it's not uncommon to see an interracial couple on the street. Now, does this mean things are fabulous now? Oh, hell no. We're a very, very long ways away. But there's no doubt that we're going the right direction generation by generation. What was the role of the woman 200 years ago? This is another obvious one. But did you know that in countries like the United States, they had legal concepts of marital privilege, which granted husbands significant privilege and control in the marriage, including the right to discipline their wives. Yes, it's true. Men were legally allowed to beat their wives so long as in court they can prove she deserved it. That's a pretty messed up right there. Like racism, we're a long ways off where we should be, but the evidence is screaming that we're going in the right direction. I mean, perhaps you can make the argument that it's going too slow, and hey, I'm with you on that. But it's definitely going in the right direction. And since we're discussing the role of the woman, let's look at men, specifically the role of the father. Now, I have to admit, I do not have empirical evidence on this one, but I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that sees a huge change in the role of the father in the last, 100 years? Hell, even when I was a little boy, if I scraped my knee or something, it was unheard of for a father to cuddle his boy child in public. Today, however, we see it all the time. Men are nurturing their babies and are emotionally available to their children more than ever before. And this trend is gaining tremendous momentum. Now, this area too has a long ways to go, no question about it. But fathers are enjoying this, and so much so that there's nothing to suggest that this trend will slow down, much less stop or reverse. Okay, this is my most controversial category. The environment. Everybody's so quick to point out this metric as the one that brings us down, namely because of global warming. And don't get me wrong, I am not a science denier. Climate change is a very serious problem and an existential threat that, if left untouched, will end all of humanity, and all this goodness is for nothing. While all this is true, we do have to take a closer look at the environment as a whole. Compare pollutants at the start of the Industrial Revolution to today, you'd be flabbergasted. We've created numerous laws battling these industrial invaders, but only after we learn about it. Limited scientific understanding of the consequences of industrial activities is ultimately to blame. Humans simply didn't know. Science hadn't uncovered it yet. But as our understanding grows, so did our innovations and laws. We fixed our missteps along the way. And with the exception of these science-denying airheads, humans are en route to fixing the global warming problem too. With the refining of such technologies as green hydrogen and the popularity of things like electric cars, we're definitely making headway and advancing in the right direction. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "You can judge a society by their treatment of animals." I believe that to be very, very true. So let's take a look at how we fare in this area. First, let me tell you a secret. To see the true feelings of a democratically elected society as a whole, look no further than their laws. And it brings me great pleasure to say that many countries have enacted laws to prevent cruelty to animals, including laws against animal fighting, animal abuse, and animal neglect. In the Netherlands, they have a law about tying up your dog for more than an hour. Additionally, laws regarding animal transportation, slaughter, and laboratory care have tightened greatly and are continuing to do so. Furthermore, improved veterinary care has significantly improved the health and well-being of companion animals. And increased public awareness has led to increased public pressure, which in turn spurs the growth of animal protection organizations. All of this is a big deal. Incidentally, I would like to say that the improvements in this area, treatment of animals, is to be attributed to the growing recognition of animal sentience and the importance of considering animal welfare in various aspects of human society. But, like every other point in this list, we're nowhere near where we should be. There's so much animal abuse out there that it breaks my heart. More than legislation, we need to help people become more empathetic. Well, hey, just when you thought it was over, I spring up a bonus on you. You know, there are several more. I just couldn't figure out which one to cut out, so it's 10 plus 1. Let's look at our treatment of the elderly. This is a good one. I say that because, as it were, if Mother Nature doesn't get you, Father Time will. This means that barring affliction and trauma, we're all going to age. So I'm happy to report that the treatment of elderly is improving. For example, volunteerism. More and more young people volunteer their time in senior centers, nursing homes, and community programs that support older folks. Or intergenerational programs that bring young and old people together, such as mentoring programs, are seemingly sprouting up all over the place. Many young people provide support for their aging grandparents or other aging members of their family. And a new phenomenon evolving in society is tech support. Young people are so often helping the older folk with tech support that colloquially, you could say it's become a thing. So those are my 11 favorite metrics. Like I said, every single metric that you can think of, we are improving, and mostly at a rapid pace. It turns out that human beings, are you ready for this? Wait for it. Want peace, love, and happiness.
Holy cow!
Now, a lot of people tend to argue with me on this, saying, "But Mal, these stats only represent the West and not the rest of the world." And it's like, no, dummy. First of all, these statistics are global statistics. Yes, they are growing faster in certain parts of the world than others, that's for sure, but the progression is worldwide. Additionally, there are many examples that are specific to the developing regions of the world that demonstrate this continued progression. I mean, look no further than Pakistan, the nation whose mountainous region spawns and harbors the world's nastiest terrorists. Well, they've had demonstrations against honor killings, gang rape, and they even elected a female prime minister. There's simply no evidence of any kind whatsoever that suggests that humanity is regressing, whether it be morally, physically, or otherwise. Oh sure, our pop culture and pop religion are always portraying some kind of dystopian future, but that's hardly evidence at all. Consider this. Let's do a thought experiment. We'll go back to 1970 and let's bring some of the most popular science fiction writers of the time together. We'll commission them to write us a book, but we supply the premise. The premise is that there's a new virus unleashed into the world. It is called COVID-19. And there's no way to control it. Businesses are forced to shut down and people are forced to stay in their homes. Oh, and one more thing. This takes place in the distant future, 50 years, half a century from now, in the unimaginable year, 2020. Now I ask you, what kind of disturbing and discomposing tales of dystopia and doom would we expect to hear? Neighbors turning on neighbors, bank robberies, governments going rogue, murders on the streets. Now, obviously, I don't know what shattered stories of ruin they're going to tell, but I'm pretty comfortable in betting that none would make an accurate depiction of what actually happened. That of neighbors helping neighbors, crime plummeting worldwide, and the whole of humanity working together for each other. Another example I like to give is the example of YouTube. Yes, YouTube, probably where you're watching me right now. Let me ask you, do you know what genres of interest are the most popular on YouTube? See, originally I thought this was going to be an easy answer, just look it up. It turns out that YouTube doesn't publicly release detailed rank viewing data for all genres. So to find out, you got to do a lot of research with these third parties, and it still might not be accurate. Now, I'm not going to get into all what I did for the research, but here's what I found to be the top 5 categories of interest on YouTube. Now, remember, this is based on my own personal research and is not empirical by any stretch. They are music videos, cute animal videos, gaming, comedy, and education. So you may be asking, how is this list a good example of the goodness of humanity? Well, YouTube is a global platform and therefore is a good representation of who we are as a people globally. And if this data is to be believed, turns out that human beings, more than anything, want to listen to good tunes, pet our animals, play games, laugh, and learn. In closing, I want to say, if you're one of these people that are disturbed by where the world is going, then I would like to leave you with a quote from the Bible. Don't worry, it's completely out of context. And that is, let not your hearts be troubled. The world is a beautiful place, and the future is bright. We all have to work to make it brighter. And while on the topic of the Bible, a quick note to my religious friends. If the world has to get painfully evil and corrupt before your God shows up, then I'm afraid it looks like we're going to be waiting a very, very long time. Thanks for watching, my fellow apes. Until next time, stay loving, stay skeptical.
Holy cow!